Silence will tell you the truth about love. When you're bedridden, when you have nothing left to give, that's when you learn who is real and who is only there when you are useful. My name is Margaret Whitaker. I'm 67 years old now, but once I was the woman everyone leaned on. I built homes with my own hands, ran crews in the scorching Texas heat, and provided for my family with nothing but sweat, calluses, and an unbreakable will. The smell of sawdust and fresh concrete was my perfume, the weight of a hammer as familiar in my palm as my own heartbeat. I wasn't rich, never pretended to be, but I was proud. Proud of every house that rose from nothing under my guidance, proud of every paycheck I earned honest, proud of the way other people looked at me when they needed something built right. Then life took a sledgehammer to everything I thought I knew about strength. I lost my husband, Robert, when Amanda was only 8 years old. Cancer ate through him like termites through old wood, slow at first, then all at once. I remember holding Robert's hand in that sterile hospital room, his fingers so thin they felt like bird bones, and promising him I'd be enough for both of us. That I'd love our little girl twice as hard to make up for the love he was taking with him. "Don't let her feel empty, Margaret," Robert whispered on his last night, his voice barely a breath against the machines keeping him tethered to this world. "Promise me she'll know she's loved." I squeezed his hand and made a vow I thought I'd never break. She'll never feel what I felt growing up. Never. You see, I knew what it meant to grow up without a mother. Mine left when I was 6, walking out the door one Tuesday morning like she was going to work, except she never came back. My father did his best, but there's a particular kind of ache that comes from knowing your own mother chose to leave. It follows you like a shadow, whispering that maybe you weren't worth staying for. I swore my daughter would never carry that weight. So, I became everything for Amanda. I learned to braid her thick brown hair before school, my calloused hands surprisingly gentle with the strands once I got it right. I packed her lunches with the kind of care Robert used to, remembering that she liked her sandwiches cut diagonally and always included a handwritten note. "You're braver than you know, stronger than you seem, and loved more than you can imagine," I'd write, the same words Robert used to whisper to her at bedtime. I sat in those tiny plastic chairs at parent-teacher conferences, my work boots looking out of place among the dress shoes of other parents, listening to Mrs. Henderson praise Amanda's kindness or Mr. Rodriguez explain her struggle with fractions. I was there for every soccer game, even the ones where she missed every shot and came off the field with tears streaming down her face. I'd scoop her up and tell her that trying was more important than winning, that I was proud of her just for showing up. The years passed like seasons, each one bringing new challenges. When Amanda turned 13 and started asking questions about growing up, I drove to the library and checked out every book I could find about raising daughters. When she got her first period, I sat outside the bathroom door talking her through it while she cried from embarrassment, my voice steady even though my heart was racing. When she wanted to learn to drive, I took her to empty parking lots on Sunday mornings, my hands gripping the passenger door so tight my knuckles went white, but never letting my fear show. I worked double shifts to pay for her soccer cleats, her prom dress, her college application fees. I'd come home bone-tired, my back screaming from 10 hours of laying tile or framing walls, but I'd still help her with homework at the kitchen table. Sometimes I'd fall asleep right there, my head on my folded arms, and wake up to find she'd covered me with a blanket and left a glass of water beside me. "Thanks, Mom," she'd say the next morning, not quite meeting my eyes but meaning it. Those 2 words made every ache in my body worth it. Amanda was everything to me. She was Robert's laugh bubbling up from the kitchen, his stubborn streak when she set her mind to something, his gentle heart that broke for stray cats and lonely kids at school. When she graduated valedictorian, I cried harder than she did. When she got into college on a partial scholarship, I worked overtime for 6 months straight to cover the rest. "You don't have to do this, Mom," she said the night before she left for her freshman year. We were sitting on the porch steps, watching the fireflies blink in the darkness. I could take out loans. I shook my head. Your daddy made me promise you'd never feel empty. That includes your future. She leaned against my shoulder then, and for a moment, she was 8 years old again, seeking comfort in the solid presence of her mother. I love you, Mom. Love you too, sweetheart. More than all the stars. College changed her, the way it changes everyone. She came home less often, called less frequently. When she did visit, she seemed restless, eager to get back to her new life. I told myself this was natural, healthy even. She was becoming her own person, and wasn't that what I'd raised her to do? After graduation, she moved 3 hours away to Austin for a marketing job. She called every Sunday at first, then every other Sunday, then whenever she remembered. She started dating a man named Derek, and from her careful tone when she mentioned him, I could tell she was serious. I wanted to meet him, to shake his hand and look him in the eye the way Robert's mother had done with me all those years ago. Bring him around sometime, I'd say whenever his name came up. Soon, Mom. When things settle down. But things never seemed to settle down. There was always a work project, a weekend trip, a friend's birthday party. I learned about their engagement through a Facebook post that someone at the hardware store showed me on their phone. Congratulations, sweetheart, I said when I called her that evening. I'm happy for you. Thanks, Mom. I was going to call you tonight, I swear. Everything just happened so fast. The wedding was small, she said. Just family and close friends. I bought a new dress and had it pressed. I practiced my mother of the bride speech in the mirror until I could get through it without my voice cracking. I imagined dancing with her to The Way You Look Tonight, the song Robert used to hum while doing dishes. The invitation never came. It's just going to be Derek's immediate family and us, Amanda explained over the phone, her words coming out in a rush. We wanted something intimate. I sat in my kitchen that day, the new dress hanging in the bedroom closet like a ghost, and felt something crack inside my chest. It was the first time since Robert's funeral that I cried alone in that house. The silence felt different somehow, heavier. It was the silence of being forgotten. But I swallowed my hurt and sent a generous check anyway. For your new life, I wrote on the card. Love, Mom. The thank you note was printed, not handwritten. Margaret. It began, not Mom. I kept it on the refrigerator anyway. Amanda called less after the wedding. Months would pass without hearing her voice. When I'd finally break down and call her, she always sounded rushed, distracted. There was a brittleness in her tone that reminded me of ice forming over water, still transparent, but no longer welcoming. I'm really busy with work, Mom. Can I call you back later? Later never came. The loneliness crept in slowly, like water seeping through foundation cracks. I'd catch myself setting 2 places at the dinner table out of habit, then putting the extra plate away with hands that trembled slightly. I'd find myself listening for the sound of a car in the driveway, for a knock at the door that never came. The house that had once been filled with Amanda's laughter and Robert's humming now echoed with my footsteps and the tick of the grandfather clock Samuel had given us for housewarming. Samuel was my younger brother by 4 years, but in many ways, he'd always been the lucky one. While I'd built my life on responsibility and sacrifice, Samuel had chosen freedom. He never married, never had children. Instead, he'd made smart investments and bought himself a piece of paradise, a beach house on the Gulf Coast where he spent his days fishing and reading and watching the sunrise paint the water gold. You're welcome anytime, Margaret, he'd always say when he visited. Doors always open. I'd always been too busy for his invitations, too focused on work, too devoted to being the responsible one. Now, as the silence in my house grew louder, I found myself wishing I'd said yes more often. Samuel visited every few weeks, driving the 3 hours from his coastal sanctuary to check on me. He'd bring fresh fish he'd caught and stories about the pelicans that nested near his deck. He never asked why Amanda didn't visit. He never mentioned the absence that hung in the air like smoke. He just filled the quiet with his presence and left me feeling a little less alone. It was Samuel who found me on that Tuesday morning in March 2015. I'd been feeling strange for days. Headaches that came and went, moments where words seemed to scramble in my mouth like puzzle pieces. I kept telling myself it was stress, maybe high blood pressure. At 57, I was no stranger to the aches and pains of a body that had worked hard for decades. But this was different. Samuel had come by to drop off some grouper he'd caught, letting himself in through the back door the way he always did. He found me on the kitchen floor, my right side completely numb, my mouth refusing to form the words I needed to tell him I was scared. The stroke had struck like lightning, sudden and devastating. In an instant, it stole half my body, half my speech, half my independence. The strong woman who had built houses was reduced to a broken thing that couldn't even ask for water without slurring. The first few weeks in the hospital were a blur of tests and therapists and doctors who spoke in careful, measured tones about realistic expectations and quality-of-life adjustments. My right arm hung useless at my side. My right leg dragged when I tried to walk. Words that had once flowed easily now caught in my throat like fishhooks. Ms. Whitaker, the neurologist said during one of his visits, his clipboard held against his chest like armor. The damage is extensive. You'll need significant support during your recovery. Recovery. As if this were something I could fix with enough determination and elbow grease. Amanda came to the hospital exactly once. She stood in the doorway like she was afraid to come too close, her face pale and her hands clenched at her sides. She looked at me lying in that narrow bed with tubes and wires connecting me to machines that beeped and hummed, and I saw something in her eyes that cut deeper than any scalpel. Fear. Not fear for me, but fear of me. Fear of what I'd become. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I tried to speak, tried to tell her how glad I was to see her, how sorry I was that she had to see me like this. What came out was a garbled mess of syllables that made her flinch. She stayed for maybe 20 minutes, making small talk about the weather and her job while avoiding my eyes. When she left, she kissed my forehead with lips that felt cold against my skin. I'll check on you soon," she said. But soon became never. They discharged me to a rehabilitation facility after 2 weeks, a sterile place that smelled of disinfectant and defeat. I spent 3 months there, learning to walk again with a walker, learning to speak again with exercises that made me feel like a child. Other patients came and went, their families visiting every day, bringing flowers and homemade cookies, and the kind of chatter that makes hospital rooms feel less like prisons. Amanda never came. Samuel visited twice a week, regular as sunrise. He'd sit beside my bed and tell me about the dolphins he'd seen that morning, the way the light looked different when it bounced off the water. He never asked about Amanda's absence. He never made me feel like I was a burden or a charity case. He just loved me simply and completely, the way family is supposed to. When I was finally released, it was Samuel who helped me navigate the maze of insurance and home health care. It was Samuel who drove me home to a house that had been modified with grab bars and ramps and all the humbling accommodations of diminished capability. And it was Samuel who held me when I broke down that first night, sitting on the edge of the bed where Robert and I had once whispered our dreams to each other in the dark. "She's not coming, is she?" I asked him, my words still thick but clearer than they'd been in months. Samuel's arms tightened around me. "I don't know, Margaret. I honestly don't know." The truth was harder to bear than any lie. Being bedridden changes you in ways that go deeper than muscle atrophy and bed sores. It strips away everything you thought you knew about yourself and leaves you face to face with the person you are when all the doing is taken away. For 5 years, I lay in that bed, staring at ceilings that became as familiar as old friends, counting the cracks in the plaster and learning to find faces in the water stains. I had home health aides who came in shifts, angels and scrubs who fed me and bathed me and helped me with the basic human indignities that stroke survivors learn to navigate. Maria worked mornings and always brought me coffee exactly the way I liked it. James worked evenings and had a laugh that could fill the whole house. They were kind, professional, caring. But they weren't family. The phone sat on my nightstand like a monument to hope deferred. Some days, I'd stare at it for hours, willing it to ring. Other days, I'd work up the courage to dial Amanda's number, my left hand fumbling with buttons that seemed designed for steadier fingers. The conversations, when she bothered to answer, were exercises in emotional archaeology, me desperately digging for some sign of the daughter I'd raised, her expertly deflecting with surface pleasantries that revealed nothing. "Amanda," I said during one call, maybe 6 months after my stroke, "I need you." My voice broke on the word need, and I hated how small it made me sound. But it was the truth. I needed her presence, her voice, her laugh. I needed to know that 27 years of bedtime stories and scrape-knee kisses and proud mother moments had meant something. Her sigh was audible through the phone. "Mom, I can't put my life on hold to sit by a bed. You'll have to figure something else out." The line went quiet except for the sound of my heart breaking in real time. "I'm not asking you to put your life on hold," I managed to say. "Just visit. Just be here." "I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. But this isn't something I can handle right now." She hung up without saying goodbye. I tried again a few months later, swallowing what was left of my pride. "Just an hour, sweetheart. Just sit with me for an hour." This time her voice had an edge to it, sharp enough to cut. "I'm too busy with my own life to play nurse. I can't deal with this right now." Play nurse. As if loving your mother when she's broken was some kind of game. The third time I called, my desperation had transformed into something rawer, more honest. I was past caring about dignity or pride. I was a mother who missed her child, and I was dying by degrees in a bed that smelled like medicine and loneliness. "I don't need much," I whispered into the phone. "Just come. Please." Her response was immediate and final. "I'm not cut out to take care of someone who can't even take care of themselves." The words hit me like physical blows. Someone who can't even take care of themselves. As if stroke was a moral failing, a weakness of character rather than a medical catastrophe that could happen to anyone. The last time I called her, I could barely get the words out through my tears. "Amanda, I'm your mother. I changed your diapers and held you when you had nightmares and worked myself to the bone, so you'd never want for anything. I'm asking you for one thing in return. Just don't abandon me." Her voice, when it came, was colder than a February morning. "You've always been the strong one, Mom. I can't handle seeing you like that. Don't call me for this again." The dial tone that followed was the sound of a door closing forever. After that, I stopped reaching for the phone. I let it sit there, silent and accusatory, a piece of technology that connected me to everyone except the one person who mattered most. The days blurred together in a haze of medication schedules and physical therapy appointments and the slow work of learning to live in a body that no longer obeyed my will. I watched morning shows and game shows and nature documentaries that showed me places I'd never see. I read books when my hands were steady enough to hold them, though the words sometimes swam on the page like fish in muddy water. But mostly I thought. I had nothing but time to think, to replay conversations and wonder where I'd gone wrong. Had I been too protective? Not protective enough? Had I failed to prepare her for the messiness of adult life, the way love sometimes demands more than we think we can give? Samuel came every Sunday without fail, rain or shine, sickness or health. He'd settle into the chair beside my bed with the patience of a man who had nowhere else he'd rather be. He brought me books and crossword puzzles and stories from his beach house that painted pictures so vivid I could almost taste the salt air. "There's a osprey nest right outside my bedroom window," he told me one afternoon. "The chicks hatched last week. You should see them, all fluffy and demanding, squawking at their parents from dawn to dusk." I smiled, or tried to. My face still didn't always cooperate with my intentions. "Sounds familiar." Samuel laughed. "Kids are ungrateful at every species level, I guess." He meant it as a joke, but we both felt the weight of what he wasn't saying. Through Samuel, I learned bits and pieces about Amanda's life, information that filtered to him through mutual acquaintances and social media posts. She and Derek had bought a house. She'd gotten a promotion. They were trying to have children. Children. The thought of becoming a grandmother filled me with a joy so sharp it was almost painful. Maybe when Amanda became a mother herself, she'd understand the depth of a parent's love. Maybe she'd remember what it felt like to be someone's whole world and realize what she'd thrown away. But the months passed and still she didn't come. In the 3rd year of my confinement, Samuel brought news that made my heart leap and break in the same moment. "She had a baby," he said quietly.
"A boy."
They named him Michael. A grandson. I had a grandson I'd never meet, never hold, never teach to swing a hammer or ride a bike. Amanda had given birth to a child she'd never let me know, extending the chain of abandonment into another generation. "Is he healthy?" I asked, because even anger couldn't kill a grandmother's concern.
10 fingers, 10 toes.
8 pounds, 3 ounces. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine him, this child who carried my blood, my genes, my stubborn chin that Amanda had inherited and probably passed along. I wondered if he'd have Robert's eyes or Amanda's smile. I wondered if Amanda would tell him stories about the grandmother he'd never meet, or if she'd let me fade into family legend like a ghost who'd never existed at all. 2 years later, Samuel brought news of another birth.
A girl this time. Emma.
2 grandchildren. 2 little souls who shared my DNA and my history, but would never know my name. The cruelty of it took my breath away. After 5 years, therapy got me back on my feet, slowly with help. I could walk short distances and speak clearly enough. Amanda still never came. Something shifted in me then. Maybe it was the accumulation of abandoned hopes finally reaching critical mass, or maybe it was simply time doing what it does, wearing down the sharp edges of pain until they become something more manageable. I began to accept that Amanda was gone, not just physically, but emotionally. The daughter I'd raised had become someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of letting her own mother waste away in loneliness while she built a life that had no room for inconvenient love. It was around this time that Samuel started mentioning his beach house more frequently. Not as stories to entertain a bedridden sister, but as invitations wrapped in casual conversation. "The dolphins have been incredible this year," he'd say. "Right at sunrise, they come in so close you can almost touch them from the dock." Or, "I've been thinking about adding a wheelchair ramp to the deck. Not for any particular reason. Just seems like a good idea." The not-so-subtle hints made me smile despite everything. Samuel had always been terrible at subtlety, wearing his heart on his sleeve like a badge of honor. It was one of the things I'd always envied about him, his ability to love openly, without the caution that had defined my own emotional landscape. "Are you trying to tell me something, Sam?" I asked him one Sunday afternoon. He grinned, caught in the act of caring. "Maybe. The guest room has a great view of the water. And the physical therapist I've been researching in town has excellent credentials." For the first time in years, I felt something that wasn't quite hope, but was at least adjacent to it. A life by the ocean, away from the memories that haunted this house like restless spirits. A chance to wake up to something other than the bedroom ceiling that had become my sky. But before I could seriously consider Samuel's offer, life dealt another devastating blow. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, 5.5 years after my stroke had changed everything. It was Samuel's neighbor, a woman named Beverly, who lived in the house next to his on the beach. "Ms. Whitaker?" Her voice was shaky, uncertain. "I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but Samuel, he passed away in his sleep last night." His heart just stopped. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered to the floor. Samuel.
Gone.
The one person who had never wavered, never abandoned me, never treated me like a burden to be managed rather than a sister to be loved. The funeral was held at a small church near the beach Samuel had called home. I attended in a wheelchair, pushed by Maria, who had volunteered to drive me the 3 hours to say goodbye. The service was simple, attended by neighbors and fishing buddies and a handful of people whose lives Samuel had touched with his quiet kindness. Amanda was there. I saw her before she saw me, standing near the back of the church in a black dress that made her look older than her 35 years. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, styled in the kind of severe bob that suggested she'd learned to armor herself against the world. She was alone, no Derek, no children. Just my daughter, mourning the uncle who had never let her down. Our eyes met across the sanctuary, and I watched her face cycle through a series of emotions: surprise, guilt, something that might have been grief, but looked more like fear. She looked away quickly, finding sudden interest in the stained glass window that cast colored shadows across the pews. After the service, as people milled around sharing memories and condolences, Amanda approached my wheelchair with the careful steps of someone walking through a minefield. "Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know you'd be here." I looked up at her, this stranger who wore my daughter's face, and felt the familiar ache of love mixed with loss. She was still beautiful, still carried herself with the confidence I'd tried so hard to instill in her. But there was a hardness around her eyes that hadn't been there before, a defensive set to her shoulders that spoke of battles fought and compromises made. Samuel was all the family I had left, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "Of course I'm here." She flinched at the implication, but didn't argue. We stood there in awkward silence, two people who shared everything and nothing, connected by blood and separated by choices neither of us seemed able to bridge. "How are you?" she asked finally, the question automated, polite. "Alive," I said. It wasn't cruel, just factual. I was alive, which was more than Samuel could say, more than I'd expected to be able to say a few years ago. Amanda nodded and looked around the room as if searching for an escape route. There are people I should talk to." "Of course." She started to walk away, then turned back.
"Mom,
I'm glad you're doing better." Better. As if 5 years of abandonment and loneliness constituted a recovery worth celebrating. I watched her disappear into the crowd and felt something settle in my chest, heavy and final. This was who she was now, someone who could attend her uncle's funeral but couldn't visit her mother's sickbed. Someone who offered empty pleasantries instead of real connection. The will reading took place the following week in the office of Samuel's lawyer, a soft-spoken man named Patterson who'd handled Samuel's affairs for decades. Amanda wasn't there. She'd returned to her life in Austin, probably relieved to have done her familial duty by attending the funeral. I expected Samuel to leave me something small and sentimental, maybe his fishing gear or the grandfather clock he'd inherited from our parents. I certainly didn't expect what Patterson read from the formal document with its careful legal language. "To my sister Margaret, the strongest woman I've ever known, I leave my house at 47 Ocean View Drive, along with all its contents and the investment accounts established for its maintenance." She gave everything to everyone else her whole life. Now it's her turn to live. The beach house. The $10 million slice of paradise that Samuel had loved more than any person he'd ever known. He'd left it all to me. the broken-down sister who couldn't even climb stairs without assistance. Patterson handed me a set of keys that felt impossibly heavy in my palm. "There's also this," he said, passing me a sealed envelope with my name written in Samuel's careful handwriting. I opened it right there in the office, not caring that Patterson could see my hands trembling as I unfolded the single sheet of paper. "Margaret," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I've gone on to whatever comes next, and you're probably sitting in Patterson's office wondering why I left you a house you never asked for. The truth is, I always knew this place was meant for you. You spent your whole life building homes for other people. It's time you had one that was built just for you. The sunrises here are worth whatever pain it takes to see them, and the sound of the waves at night will wash away more hurt than any medicine ever could. I know Amanda broke your heart. I know the last few years have been harder than anyone should have to bear. But you're not done yet, sister. There's still life left in you, still love left to give. Maybe not to her. Some people are too afraid of their own capacity for cruelty to accept forgiveness. But to someone. Don't spend whatever time you have left waiting for people who've already chosen to walk away. The ocean doesn't wait for anyone, and neither should you. Love, Sam. P.S. The dolphins come by every morning around 7. Don't sleep through them." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my purse. Patterson was saying something about property transfers and tax implications, but all I could hear was the sound of waves I hadn't yet seen, calling me toward a life I'd never imagined. By nightfall, Amanda called. Her friend at the courthouse had already told her the probate named me sole heir. "Mom," Amanda's voice was breathless, excited in a way I hadn't heard since she was a child. "I just heard about Uncle Samuel's will. Is it true?" Straight to the point. No inquiry about my well-being. No condolences for the loss of the brother who'd been more family to me than our own mother ever was. Just the question that mattered to her. Is it true that there's money involved? "Hello, Amanda." "Mom, this is incredible. $10 million. You could do so much with that. Maybe we should talk about your options, you know? I could help you manage things."
We.
After 5 years of radio silence, suddenly it was we. "I don't need help managing anything," I said calmly. "But thank you for the offer." There was a pause, and I could hear her recalibrating, switching to the tone she probably used with difficult clients at work. "Of course not, Mom. I just meant, well, it's a lot of responsibility, and with your health situation, I just want to make sure you don't get taken advantage of by anyone. Anyone except you, I thought but didn't say. I'm moving to the beach house," I told her. "Samuel wanted me to have it, and that's what I'm going to do." "Moving? Mom, that's a big decision. Are you sure that's wise? You don't even know that area, and the medical facilities might not be as good as what you have here." Concern for my medical care, now that there was inheritance money at stake. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so heartbreaking. "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but my mind is made up." "Well, then, maybe I could come visit you there? Help you get settled? I have some vacation time coming up." 5 years. 5 years she'd had to visit me, and the only thing that finally motivated her was the prospect of $10 million. "Maybe," I said, though we both knew it was a lie. I hung up before she could say anything else, before the hope in her voice could trick me into believing she'd actually changed. The move to the beach house took 6 weeks to arrange. Maria helped coordinate everything, from hiring the moving company to finding new healthcare providers in Samuelstown. She cried when I told her I was leaving, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like the vanilla lotion she always wore. "You're going to be so happy there, Ms. Margaret," she said. "I can feel it." I hope she was right. I was 62 years old, partially disabled, and about to start over in a place where I knew no one except the ghosts of Samuel's stories. But it felt right in a way nothing had felt right in years. The house was everything Samuel had promised and more. It sat on a bluff overlooking the Gulf, its wraparound deck offering an unobstructed view of water that stretched to the horizon. The interior was comfortable without being fancy, overstuffed furniture that invited long afternoons of reading, a kitchen with windows that framed the sunrise like living paintings, and a master bedroom with French doors that opened onto the sound of waves. Samuel's presence was everywhere, in the books lining the shelves, the fishing gear organized neatly in the garage, the photo albums full of sunsets and seabirds, and the quiet joy of a man who'd figured out how to be happy alone. But it didn't feel like living in a shrine. It felt like coming home. The first morning, I woke before dawn and made my way carefully onto the deck, my walker navigating the threshold with only minor difficulty. The sky was already lightening in the east, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold that no earthly artist could have imagined. And then I saw them. The dolphins Samuel had written about, their sleek bodies cutting through the water in graceful arcs, their presence both wild and welcoming. I stood there watching them until the sun cleared the horizon, and for the first time in years, I felt something that might have been peace. The days took on a rhythm that was both new and timeless. Morning coffee on the deck while the dolphins played. Afternoons spent reading in Samuel's chair by the window, the sound of waves providing a constant lullaby. Evenings watching sunsets that seemed personally crafted for an audience of one. I hired a local woman named Grace to help with shopping and household tasks, though I was managing more than I'd expected on my own. She was around my age, a widow with grown children who lived too far away to visit often. She understood loneliness without needing it explained. "Your brother had good taste," she said on her first day, admiring the view from the kitchen window. "This place heals people." I was beginning to believe her. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Not the woman I'd been before the stroke. That version was gone forever, but a new version who was learning to find joy in smaller things, to measure success in moments rather than achievements. 3 months passed in this peaceful rhythm. I spoke to Amanda occasionally, brief conversations where she asked about my health and the house, and whether I needed anything. The subtext was always there. When can we talk about the money? But I ignored it. I was building a life that had nothing to do with what she wanted from me. Then one afternoon in February, a car pulled into my driveway. I was reading on the deck, wrapped in one of Samuel's old sweaters that still smelled faintly of salt and cedar, when I heard the crunch of tires on the shell-lined drive. I looked up to see a silver sedan with Texas plates, and my heart did something complicated in my chest. Through the windshield, I could make out Amanda's familiar silhouette. She sat in the car for several minutes, her hands gripping the steering wheel, before finally opening the door. She emerged carrying a bouquet of white lilies, 10 of them, I counted automatically. 10 flowers for 10 years of absence. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, though I doubted she'd chosen the number intentionally. Amanda had never been one for subtle gestures. She walked toward the deck with the careful steps of someone approaching a wild animal, her eyes taking in the house, the view, the life I'd built without her. Her smile looked practiced, the kind you wear in conference rooms. Perfect, but not warm. "Hello, Mom," she said when she reached the bottom of the deck steps. Her voice carried across the space between us like a prayer offered without much hope of being heard. I set down my book, one of Samuel's mystery novels that I'd been enjoying, and looked at her properly for the first time in over 5 years. She was still beautiful, still carried herself with that particular blend of confidence and vulnerability that had made her such a compelling child. But there was something brittle about her now, like glass that had been heated and cooled too quickly. "Amanda," I said, my voice giving away nothing. "This is unexpected." She climbed the steps slowly, her high heels clicking against the wooden planks in a rhythm that sounded like rainfall. When she reached the top, she held out the lilies like a white flag of surrender. "I brought these for you," she said. "I remember." I remembered Dad always loved lilies. She did remember. Robert had planted lily bulbs every fall, filling our modest backyard with their trumpet-shaped blooms each spring. Amanda had been perhaps 6 years old when she'd helped plant the last batch, her small hands dirty with soil and her face serious with the responsibility of it all. I took the flowers, their petals soft as silk against my weathered palms. They were beautiful, expensive, perfect, everything Amanda had always valued. But they felt cold in my hands, like an offering made for appearance rather than love. "Thank you," I said, because Robert had raised a lady, even if life had tested that lady's limits. Amanda looked around the deck, taking in the comfortable furniture, the view that stretched to infinity, the evidence of a life lived well despite her absence. "This place is incredible, Mom. Uncle Samuel had amazing taste." "He did." She shifted nervously, the silence stretching between us like a gulf that neither of us seemed willing to cross. Finally, she gestured toward the empty chair beside me. "May I?" I nodded, curious despite myself about what had driven her to make the 3-hour drive to my doorstep. She settled into Samuel's chair with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. "I've been thinking a lot since Uncle Samuel died," she began, her words careful, rehearsed. "About family, about what's important, about mistakes I've made." I waited. After 5 years of silence, I'd learned the value of letting other people fill the quiet spaces. "I know I wasn't there for you when you needed me," she continued, her voice gaining strength as she found her rhythm. "I know I let you down in ways that probably seem unforgivable."
I was scared, Mom.
Scared and selfish and not ready to watch the strongest person I knew become vulnerable. Vulnerable. It was a kinder word than broken, more dignified than useless. I appreciated the effort, even if I didn't trust it. "I've had children of my own now," she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the words. "Michael is 7 and Emma is 5. They're incredible kids, Mom. Michael looks just like you did in those old pictures Dad used to show me, and Emma has your stubborn streak. She argues with me about everything. 7 and 5. My grandchildren discuss like weather patterns or stock market updates." I felt that familiar ache in my chest, the hollow space where grandmother love was supposed to live but had never been allowed to take root. "Derek and I were having problems," Amanda continued, apparently taking my silence as encouragement to keep talking. "Marriage problems, money problems, the kind of stress that makes you realize what really matters. And what matters is family. What matters is forgiveness and second chances, and not letting pride keep you from the people who love you." She reached across the space between our chairs and placed her hand over mine. Her fingers were cold, soft from the kind of work that happened in air-conditioned offices rather than under the beating sun. "I want to make this right, Mom. I want my children to know their grandmother. I want us to be a family again." The words hung in the salt air between us, and I found myself studying her face for signs of sincerity. She was crying, real tears that left tracks down her carefully applied makeup. Her pain seemed genuine, her regret authentic. But timing is everything, and Amanda's timing had always been impeccable when it came to getting what she wanted. "How long have you known about the inheritance?" I asked quietly. She blinked, thrown by the directness of the question. What do you mean?" "The beach house. The money. Samuel's will. How long have you known the details?" Her hand slipped away from mine, and I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, maybe, or the recognition that I wasn't going to be as easy to manage as she'd hoped. "I found out the same day I called you," she said. "My friend Jennifer works at the courthouse, and she mentioned seeing the probate filing. But, Mom, that's not why I'm here." "Isn't it?"
No.
The word came out sharp, defensive. "I mean, yes, I know about the money, but that's not—" "I've been thinking about reaching out for months. Ever since the funeral, actually. Seeing you there, seeing how frail you looked. Frail. I tested the word on my tongue. Found it wanting. Is that what I look like to you? No, that's not. I didn't mean. She took a deep breath, visibly collecting herself. You look good, Mom. Better than I expected. This place clearly agrees with you. I leaned back in my chair and let the sound of the waves fill the silence. In the distance, a pelican dove for fish, its wings folding at the perfect moment to knife through the surface of the water. Life and death and survival, all playing out in the space of a heartbeat. Tell me about them, I said finally. What? My grandchildren. Tell me about Michael and Emma. Amanda's face brightened immediately, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the enthusiastic girl who used to tell me about her day over dinner, her words tumbling over each other in excitement. Michael's in second grade, and he's obsessed with dinosaurs. He can tell you everything about a Tyrannosaurus Rex or a Triceratops or any of about 50 others whose names I can't even pronounce. He builds these elaborate scenes with his toy dinosaurs, complete with volcanoes and prehistoric forests. Derek thinks it's just a phase, but I think he's going to be a scientist someday. Despite myself, I smiled. What else? He's gentle, like you were with me when I was little. Last week, he found a baby bird that had fallen out of its nest, and he spent the whole afternoon trying to get it back to its mother. He made me help him build a ladder out of sticks and string. The bird flew away before we could help it, but Michael wasn't upset. He said it probably just needed to practice flying. The image of a 7-year-old boy with my stubborn chin trying to rescue a fallen bird made my chest tight with longing. This was what I'd been denied, the everyday miracles of watching children grow, of seeing your own story continue in small hands and curious minds. And Emma? Emma is fire, Amanda said with a laugh that sounded almost like her old self. She's 5 going on 15, questions everything, and has opinions about topics she knows nothing about. Last month, she decided she was going to be a mermaid when she grows up, so she's been practicing holding her breath in the bathtub and swimming at every opportunity. She can't actually swim yet, but that doesn't stop her from trying. She sounds like someone else I used to know, I said, and Amanda had the grace to blush. I was never that stubborn. You once spent an entire Saturday sitting on the front porch because I told you that you couldn't wear your Halloween costume to church. You were convinced that if you sat there long enough, I'd change my mind. Did it work? You wore the costume to church. We both laughed then, the sound strange and rusty after so many years of silence. For a moment, it felt almost normal, a mother and daughter sharing memories on a sun-drenched deck overlooking the ocean. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the weight of everything that had gone unsaid, undone, unforgiven. I know you hate me, Amanda said quietly, her voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I'm praying that maybe there's still enough love left for us to try again.
Hate.
The word hit me like a physical blow, not because it was accurate, but because it wasn't. I'd tried to hate her. God knows it would have been easier than the complicated tangle of love and disappointment and grief that I actually felt. But hate requires a hardness of heart that I'd never quite managed to achieve. I don't hate you, Amanda, I said finally. I hate what you did. I hate that you abandoned me when I was broken. I hate that you let fear and selfishness keep you from being the daughter I raised you to be. But I don't hate you. She sobbed then, her carefully maintained composure crumbling like a sandcastle hit by an unexpected wave. I'm so sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry.
Mama.
She hadn't called me that since she was 12 years old and still thought I could fix anything. The word was a key that unlocked something in my chest, something I'd kept carefully sealed for the better part of a decade. I reached over and took her hand, my thumb tracing across her knuckles the way I used to when she was small and scared. I know you are. We sat there as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, two people connected by blood and history and a love that had survived everything except itself. The silence between us was different now, not empty, but full of possibility. What happens now? Amanda asked eventually. It was a fair question. I'd spent 5 years learning to live without her, building a life that was full despite her absence. Could I risk letting her back in? Could I trust her to stay this time when things got difficult, when the money questions got complicated, when loving me required sacrifice rather than reward? I don't know, I said honestly. I'm not the same woman I was 5 years ago, and you're not the same girl I raised. Maybe we need to figure out who we are now before we decide who we can be together. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I'd like that. I'd like to try. It won't be easy, I warned her. I'm not going to pretend that the last 5 years didn't happen, and I'm not going to trust you just because you showed up with flowers and an apology. I understand. And I'm not going to be your financial advisor or your retirement plan. This house, this money, it's mine to do with as I please. Something flickered across her face at that, but she nodded. Of course. I studied her for a long moment, looking for signs of the calculating woman who had called me the day after Samuel's will was read. What I saw was more complicated. Genuine remorse mixed with hope, love tangled up with self-interest, a daughter who wanted her mother back, but also wanted the security she could provide. Maybe that was enough. Maybe love was always complicated, always mixed up with need and want and fear. Maybe the question wasn't whether Amanda's motives were pure, but whether they were human. There are conditions, I said. Anything. I want to meet them. Michael and Emma. I want to know my grandchildren. Yes, of course. They want to meet you too, And not just for a weekend visit or a holiday obligation. I want to be part of their lives if they'll have me. I want to teach Michael about building things with his hands, and I want to take Emma to see the dolphins in the morning. Amanda's smile was radiant. They would love that. They would absolutely love that. And I want honesty between us. No more games, no more manipulation, no more choosing the easy path when love requires something harder. I promise. I wanted to believe her. More than that, I needed to believe her. Because the alternative was spending whatever years I had left alone with my books and my dolphins and the ghost of a brother who'd loved me enough to give me a second chance at living. When can I meet them? I asked.
Soon.
This week, if you want. They're on spring break, and Derek is staying in Austin for a while. It would just be the three of us. Just the three of us. The phrase carried the weight of possibility, of small hands learning to cast fishing lines and young voices filling the empty spaces in my too-quiet house. I'd like that, I said. Amanda's tears started fresh then, but these were different. Tears of relief rather than regret, joy rather than guilt. She squeezed my hand with fingers that were warming in the afternoon sun. Thank you, Mama. Thank you for giving us another chance. I squeezed back, allowing myself to hope for the first time in longer than I cared to remember. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe Amanda would disappoint me again when the novelty wore off and the day-to-day work of loving got difficult. But maybe, just maybe, the girl I'd raised was still in there somewhere, buried under years of mistakes and fears, but not lost entirely. That night, after Amanda had driven back to Austin with promises to return with the children in 3 days, I sat on the deck and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of forgiveness. The dolphins were back, playing in the shallows as if celebrating some invisible victory. I thought about Samuel, about the gift he'd given me in leaving me this place. Not just the house or the money, but the distance from old wounds and the space to heal. I thought about Robert, about the promise I'd made to never let Amanda feel empty, and wondered if I'd kept it or broken it, or somehow managed to do both. Most of all, I thought about second chances and the courage they required from everyone involved. Amanda would have to prove herself trustworthy. I would have to risk being hurt again. Michael and Emma would have to open their hearts to a grandmother they'd never known existed. But as I sat there listening to the eternal conversation between wind and water, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, the possibility that the best parts of my story might still be ahead of me. 3 days later, Amanda returned. But this time, she wasn't alone. I heard them before I saw them, the sound of car doors slamming and children's voices raised in excitement. I was on the deck again, coffee growing cold in my hands as I watched for dolphins, when two small figures came racing around the corner of the house. The boy stopped first, his eyes wide as he took in the ocean stretching endlessly before him. He was tall for his age, all knees and elbows, and the kind of intense curiosity that seemed to radiate from his pores. His dark hair was tousled from the car ride, and when he turned to look at me, I saw my own eyes staring back from a face that was unmistakably Robert's grandson. The girl was right behind him, smaller but no less energetic, her blonde hair streaming behind her like a banner. She took one look at the water and let out a whoop of joy that could have called dolphins from miles away. "Is this the ocean?" she demanded, turning to Amanda, who was following more slowly, weighed down with bags and the careful expression of a mother entering uncharted territory. "It's the Gulf of Mexico," Amanda said. "Remember what we talked about?" The girl, Emma, I reminded myself, rolled her eyes with the exaggerated patience of a 5-year-old correcting an adult's obvious mistake. "I know that, Mom. But is this where the mermaids live?" Michael, meanwhile, had approached the edge of the deck with the methodical caution of a scientist. "The water is really blue," he observed. "Why is it bluer than the lake at home?" Before I could answer, Emma had noticed me sitting in my chair, and her face lit up with a kind of recognition that had nothing to do with memory and everything to do with instinct. "Are you our grandma?" she asked, marching up to me with the confidence of someone who had never met a stranger. My throat closed up completely. After 5 years of imagining this moment, dreaming about it, grieving for its impossibility, I found myself speechless in the face of two small people who carried my blood and my hope for the future. "Yes," I managed to say. "I'm your grandma." Emma studied me with the intensity of a jeweler examining a diamond. "You look different than I thought you would." "Different how?" "Happier," she said with the matter-of-fact wisdom of childhood. "Mom said you were sad for a long time." Michael had edged closer during this exchange, his curiosity clearly warring with natural caution. "Did you really build houses?" he asked.
I did.
"Lots of them." "With your hands?" "With my hands and lots of tools and some help from other people who knew how to build things." His eyes widened. "Could you teach me?" Before I could answer, Emma had climbed onto the arm of my chair with the casual assumption that grandmas existed primarily to be climbed upon. "Can we see the dolphins now?" "Mom said there are dolphins." I looked over at Amanda, who was watching this reunion with tears streaming down her face. She nodded encouragingly, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not healing exactly, but the beginning of healing. "They usually come by around 7 in the morning," I told Emma. "But sometimes they visit in the evening too, if we're lucky." "Can we watch for them?" "We can watch for them." And so we did. The 4 of us arranged ourselves along the deck railing, Emma perched on my lap with the fearless trust of a child who had never been betrayed. Michael pressed against my side, asking endless questions about marine life. Amanda sitting close enough to touch, but far enough away to give us space to discover each other. The dolphins didn't come that evening, but it didn't matter. We had time now, time to learn each other's stories, time to build trust, time to figure out what kind of family we might become. Over dinner that night, takeout pizza eaten on the deck while the sun set behind us, Michael told me about his dinosaur collection and his plans to become a paleontologist. Emma regaled us with her theories about mermaid society and her ongoing swimming lessons. Amanda mostly listened, occasionally catching my eye with expressions that ranged from grateful to nervous to something that might have been hope. When it came time for baths and bedtime stories, the children insisted I be involved in both. I found myself sitting on the edge of a bathtub for the first time in decades, helping to wash sandy feet and listening to detailed reports about seashells and the logistics of building sandcastles. "Will you tell us a story, Grandma?" Michael asked as I tucked him into the bed in Samuel's old guest room. "What kind of story?" "A true one. About when you and Mom were little." I looked at Amanda, who was tucking Emma into the daybed by the window. She nodded, and I settled into the chair between the two beds. "Once upon a time," I began, "there was a little girl who was afraid of thunderstorms." The story I told was simple, just a memory of Amanda at age 6, hiding under her bed during a particularly loud storm while I coaxed her out with promises of hot chocolate and songs Robert used to sing. But as I spoke, I watched both children's faces in the lamplight, and I saw them learning something important, that their mother had once been small and scared and loved, that families were made of moments like these, accumulated over years and held together by the decision to keep showing up for each other. When I finished, Emma was already asleep, one small hand curled under her cheek. Michael's eyes were drooping, but he fought sleep with the determination of someone who didn't want to miss anything important. "Grandma," he whispered. "Yes. I'm glad we found you." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they healed something I hadn't realized was still broken. I leaned over and kissed his forehead, breathing in the scent of salt air and shampoo and the indefinable sweetness of childhood. "I'm glad you found me too, buddy." Later, after the children were asleep, Amanda and I sat on the deck with glasses of wine and the comfortable exhaustion that comes from a day well spent. "They love you already," she said quietly. "They're easy to love. So are you." I looked at her then, this woman who was both my daughter and a stranger, and tried to reconcile the person she'd been with the person she was becoming. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, a weariness that spoke of battles fought and losses sustained. But there was also something softer about her now, something that reminded me of the girl who used to help me plant lily bulbs in our backyard garden. "What happened to your marriage?" I asked. She sighed, swirling the wine in her glass. "Derek and we grew apart, I guess. Or maybe we were never really together in the first place. We were good at being a couple when things were easy, but when life got complicated, we didn't know how to be partners." "Is that why you came back?" "Because things got complicated." She considered this, her gaze focused on the horizon where stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky.
Partly.
But also because I realized that I'd been running away from difficult things my whole life, and it was making me into someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could abandon her mother when she needed her most? I looked over at Amanda, who was watching this reunion with tears streaming down her face. She nodded encouragingly, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not healing exactly, but the beginning of healing. "They usually come by around 7 in the morning, I told Emma. "But sometimes they visit in the evening too, if we're lucky. Can we watch for them?" "We can watch for them." And so we did. The four of us arranged ourselves along the deck railing, Emma perched on my lap with the fearless trust of a child who had never been betrayed. Michael pressed against my side, asking endless questions about marine life. Amanda sitting close enough to touch, but far enough away to give us space to discover each other. The dolphins didn't come that evening, but it didn't matter. We had time now, time to learn each other's stories, time to build trust, time to figure out what kind of family we might become. Over dinner that night, takeout pizza eaten on the deck while the sun set behind us, Michael told me about his dinosaur collection and his plans to become a paleontologist. Emma regaled us with her theories about mermaid society and her ongoing swimming lessons. Amanda mostly listened, occasionally catching my eye with expressions that ranged from grateful to nervous to something that might have been hope. When it came time for baths and bedtime stories, the children insisted I be involved in both. I found myself sitting on the edge of a bathtub for the first time in decades, helping to wash sandy feet and listening to detailed reports about seashells and the logistics of building sandcastles. "Will you tell us a story, Grandma?" Michael asked as I tucked him into the bed in Samuel's old guest room. "What kind of story?" "A true one. About when you and Mom were little." I looked at Amanda, who was tucking Emma into the daybed by the window. She nodded, and I settled into the chair between the two beds. "Once upon a time," I began, "there was a little girl who was afraid of thunderstorms." The story I told was simple, just a memory of Amanda at age 6, hiding under her bed during a particularly loud storm while I coaxed her out with promises of hot chocolate and songs Robert used to sing. But as I spoke, I watched both children's faces in the lamplight, and I saw them learning something important, that their mother had once been small and scared and loved, that families were made of moments like these, accumulated over years and held together by the decision to keep showing up for each other. When I finished, Emma was already asleep, one small hand curled under her cheek. Michael's eyes were drooping, but he fought sleep with the determination of someone who didn't want to miss anything important. "Grandma," he whispered. "Yes. I'm glad we found you." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they healed something I hadn't realized was still broken. I leaned over and kissed his forehead, breathing in the scent of salt air and shampoo and the indefinable sweetness of childhood. "I'm glad you found me too, buddy." Later, after the children were asleep, Amanda and I sat on the deck with glasses of wine and the comfortable exhaustion that comes from a day well spent. "They love you already," she said quietly. "They're easy to love. So are you." I looked at her then, this woman who was both my daughter and a stranger, and tried to reconcile the person she'd been with the person she was becoming. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, a weariness that spoke of battles fought and losses sustained. But there was also something softer about her now, something that reminded me of the girl who used to help me plant lily bulbs in our backyard garden. "What happened to your marriage?" I asked. She sighed, swirling the wine in her glass. "Derek and we grew apart, I guess. Or maybe we were never really together in the first place. We were good at being a couple when things were easy, but when life got complicated, we didn't know how to be partners." "Is that why you came back?" "Because things got complicated." She considered this, her gaze focused on the horizon where stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky.
Partly.
But also because I realized that I'd been running away from difficult things my whole life, and it was making me into someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could abandon her mother when she needed her most? The words came out harder than I'd intended, but I didn't take them back. We'd agreed on honesty, and this was what honesty looked like. Ugly sometimes, necessary always. Amanda flinched, but didn't look away.
"Yes."
Someone who could do that. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the eternal conversation between wind and water. In the distance, I could see the lights of fishing boats heading out for the night's work, their paths marked by ribbons of phosphorescence in the dark water. "I used to think that love was supposed to be easy," Amanda said finally. "That if you had to work at it, if it required sacrifice or difficult conversations or staying when you wanted to run, then it wasn't real love. And now I think maybe the opposite is true. Maybe real love is what's left when all the easy parts are stripped away." I thought about Robert, about the way he'd fought cancer with a stubbornness that matched my own, never once asking me to walk away, even when the treatments made him sick and the prognosis grew darker. I thought about Samuel, driving 3 hours every Sunday for 5 years just to sit beside my bed and remind me that I wasn't alone. I thought about these 2 children sleeping in my house, who had opened their hearts to a grandmother they'd never known existed simply because someone told them she loved them. "Maybe you're right," I said. The next morning, we were all awake before dawn, the children's excitement about seeing dolphins making sleep impossible for any of us. Emma had appointed herself the official dolphin spotter, standing at the deck railing with Samuel's old binoculars pressed to her eyes. Michael had brought a notebook and was recording water temperature, wind direction, and other scientific observations he was certain would be crucial to dolphin prediction. Amanda made coffee and scrambled eggs while I helped the children arrange themselves for optimal viewing. The anticipation was almost unbearable. I wanted this moment to be perfect for them, wanted their first glimpse of the dolphins to be everything Samuel had promised it would be. At 6:47 a.m., Emma's excited shriek pierced the morning air. There, I see them, and there they were, a pod of 6 dolphins. Over breakfast, the children peppered me with questions about Samuel, about the dolphins, about the house and the ocean, and whether we could build sandcastles later. Their enthusiasm was infectious, filling the kitchen with an energy I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Uncle Samuel would have loved them, Amanda said quietly while the children debated the architectural merits of different sandcastle designs. He would have spoiled them rotten, I agreed. He never could resist a captive audience for his fishing stories. I wish I'd brought them here while he was still alive. I wish a lot of things. I looked at her across the table, this daughter who was trying so hard to make amends for lost time. The children were absorbed in their planning, giving us a moment of relative privacy. Regret is a luxury we can't afford, I said. Not anymore. She nodded, understanding what I meant. We'd all lost too much time to waste what we had left on wishing things had been different. The rest of that first visit passed in a blur of beach walks and sandcastle construction and stories told on the deck while the sun painted the sky in impossible colors. The children settled into the rhythm of the house as if they'd been born to it, Emma claiming the daybed by the window as her personal mermaid headquarters, Michael establishing a research station on the deck where he could observe marine life and weather patterns. On their last evening, as we sat around the deck table sharing ice cream and watching for shooting stars, Michael looked at me with a serious expression he wore when contemplating life's big questions. "Grandma," he said, "why didn't we meet you before?" The question hung in the salt air like a challenge. Amanda went very still beside me, her spoon frozen halfway to her mouth. Emma looked up from her elaborate description of mermaid ice cream preferences, sensing that something important was happening. I thought about lying, about offering some gentle explanation that would spare Amanda's feelings and preserve the fragile peace we'd built over the past few days. But I'd promised honesty, and these children deserve truth, even if it was complicated. Sometimes, I said carefully, grown-ups make mistakes that hurt the people they love. Your mom made some choices that kept us apart for a long time. Michael's brow furrowed as he processed this. What kind of choices? I glanced at Amanda, who gave me a small nod. Permission to tell the truth, or maybe just resignation that the truth was inevitable. When I got sick a few years ago, your mom was scared. She didn't know how to help me, and instead of trying to figure it out, she decided it was easier to stay away. That was mean, Emma said with the brutal honesty of childhood. Yes, I said. It was mean. It hurt my feelings very much. Amanda's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't interrupt or try to defend herself. Whatever else had changed about her, she seemed to have developed the courage to face the consequences of her choices. But people can change, I continued. Your mom realized she made a mistake, and she came to apologize. That's why you're here now. Michael considered this, with the gravity of a young philosopher. Are you still mad at her? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since Amanda had first appeared on my deck with her armload of white lilies. I'm working on not being mad, I said finally, but it takes time to trust someone again after they've hurt you. Like when Emma broke my dinosaur, and I didn't want to play with her for a whole week? Michael asked. Exactly like that. Emma looked appropriately chagrined. I said I was sorry about the dinosaur. And I forgave you, Michael said, because you're my sister, and I love you even when you break my stuff. The simplicity of childhood forgiveness, offered without conditions or lengthy negotiations. I envied them that ability to hurt and heal and move forward without carrying the weight of accumulated grievances. That's how families work, I told them. We hurt each other sometimes, but we keep choosing to love each other anyway. That night, after the children were asleep and Amanda and I were cleaning up the remains of our ice cream dinner, she turned to me with tears streaming down her face. I don't deserve this, she said. I don't deserve their love or yours or any of it. I dried my hands on a dish towel and really looked at her. This woman who was both the daughter I'd raised and a stranger I was still learning to know. She was right in a way. Forgiveness wasn't something you earned through good behavior or repentance. It was something you received as a gift, unmerited and transformative. None of us deserves love, I said. That's what makes it grace. She sobbed then, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and painful and long buried. I held her the way I used to when she was small and the world had proved too sharp for her tender heart, and for the first time in years, she felt like my daughter again. I want to be better, she whispered against my shoulder. I want to be the person you raised me to be. Then be better, I said. Starting now. When they left the next morning, the house felt impossibly quiet. I sat on the deck with my coffee, watching the dolphins and trying to sort through the complicated tangle of emotions that their visit had stirred up. Hope and fear, love and caution, the fragile beginning of something that might eventually become trust. Amanda had promised to bring the children back in 2 weeks, and we talked about summer visits, about Christmas mornings filled with the sound of children's laughter, about the possibility of something that looked like a family. But I'd learned not to count on promises. I'd learned to measure love by actions rather than words, consistency rather than intensity. Amanda would have to prove herself over time, in small ways and large ones, before I could fully open my heart to the possibility of being disappointed again. Still, as I sat there listening to the eternal conversation between wind and water, I allowed myself to hope. Michael's notebook was still on the deck table, filled with his careful observations about dolphin behavior and weather patterns. Emma had left one of her hair ribbons tied around the railing, a small flag of ownership and belonging. Maybe that was enough for now, these small evidences that I mattered to someone, that my life had room for more than solitude and memory. The dolphins came by that morning, as if they knew I needed the company. I watched them play in the shallows and thought about Samuel, about the gift he'd given me in leaving me this place, where healing was possible, where second chances grew like wildflowers in the salt air. Thank you, I whispered to the wind, to Samuel's memory, to whatever force in the universe makes redemption possible. The dolphins dove and surfaced, their movements as predictable and reassuring as prayer. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like my story might not be ending after all. It might just be beginning.